Bonjour, comment allez-vous, Daniel Frerot?
Merci, je vais très bien. Et toi, comment vas-tu?
Those who are listening at the very beginning are thinking that we are doing this interview in French, but it will be in English. Um, Daniel Frerot is from Strasbourg, France. We became acquainted with one another a number of years back. I know when we were in France back in 2015, we got to spend some time together. But most recently in December, my family spent a week in France and just enjoyed you and Tammy. So it's great to talk with you on this Zoom technology that we have available.
Thank you. Very good to be with you. And it's good to have everybody also on with us who's going to be listening to this program. Thank you for the time also that you're investing in getting to know the Lord's work around the world. And that is a fantastic idea.
Well, thank you. So you are in Strasbourg, France, a beautiful part of the world. With the picture behind you, gives you a little glimpse of where you are at. But could you tell us a little bit about your ministry, where you're serving, what you're doing, how long you've been there? I've spent a lot of time with you when I was there talking about the church, but I want to give you an opportunity to kind of give us a picture of where you're at and what you're doing.
All right, we're in the eastern part of France, northeast, in a region that is called Alsace, and we're very close to the German border, about 5 minutes away. We're in one of the largest cities also. Strasbourg is the headquarters of the European Parliament, and it used to be that the nearest church was 5 hours away from us, the nearest Church of Christ in the French-speaking world. Lately, we had another young missionary couple that came in, and now we have trying to start a work about 45 minutes away from here, but it is very recent, and the church is not yet in place. So, but it is nice to see that perhaps we can change the lack of evangelization that is going on right now here in France. Mm-hmm. And so we've been here for about 20 years to answer fully your question. And we arrived in Strasbourg. The church was not existent, but they had a lot of distributions that had been done through the years. One man also had come 2 or 3 years before we were here, and he had spent a little bit of time trying to reach out to some friends. He had a list of contacts. He had managed to baptize one person, but when we arrived, this person lived in the north of France on the west coast, way on the other side. So that's why we arrived and there was nobody, but we did have a list of contacts to be able to start our work here.
Yes. And now you're meeting, you have a church building, you have a number of, I met a variety of folks that were present, at least when I was there worshiping with you all. And can you describe a little bit about the membership and who's currently working and worshiping with you right now?
Sure. We have about 20 to 30 people in our congregation. When you start to work, very often you get at first single people. And then with time, it starts being better in the sense that you get families. When I say better, simply because you reach a broader variety of people once you have families. And we have also elderly people. You have to adjust your sermons as you start. You first are preaching only to singles. So you talk a lot about being alone and how you face being single. And then with time, you can preach on the family issues, and now we can preach also and teach on issues that the elderly are facing. And we have also a particularity of having 5 to 7 different nations represented in our congregation. Reason why is because French was a colonial empire country like England, and so after England, French were was the country that branched out the most in the world and established colonies all over. That's why there are so many French-speaking countries all around. And so these countries were for a number of years under the French Empire. They shared the same educational system. And when they have to immigrate to find better living conditions, it is a lot easier for them to come live in France than to move in Holland, where they would speak a different language that they do not know.
Yes, that's understandable. Yes. So I met some of those from those various nations, and it was really encouraging. And some of them spoke English too, which was nice. So when you translated the lessons into French, they got to hear the lesson 2 different times. But so you've grown up in Europe. Could you tell me a little bit about your upbringing? I know I don't want to spoil too much, but you grew up in a sense in the church, and then you married Tammy, who is not French originally. Could you tell me a little bit about y'all's backgrounds and how y'all came together and where you're working together now?
Sure. My father was converted shortly after Second World War by a GI that came back and established a church in Verviers, Belgium. And so with the years, when he was a young man, he ended up going through a preaching school that existed at the time in Paris, France. They trained maybe 5 to 10 young men. And out of all of them, my father is the one that has remained faithful. The others have fallen away. But he's continued and took over the position of preacher when the missionary returned to the United States in the 1960s. And has been preaching since in Verviers. He's now 80 years old. He continues to preach up there. So I grew up in a Christian family. I, of course, grew up in a country that was very atheistic. And so I would say that by the age of 16, I was no longer believing in God. Teachers, my friends, had done the job of turning me away from the faith. But then along the way, thanks to God, I ended up going to the United States when I was 18 years old for my studies in a Christian university. And I was able to meet others who believe differently about God, doctors in science who had good reasons for believing in God. And I was brought back to believing in Him this way, but not yet fully convinced that baptism was essential for salvation. And it's only when I went back home, I met my wife, who was at that time missionary assistant. She was part of an adventures and missions program from Lubbock, Texas. And she was working under my father. And it started at the time when I was in the United States. When I came home, very quickly we started to study together with Tammy and I. And she took some time to really put my nose into the scriptures, I would say it this way, to make me face what I didn't want to face. It was hard to face because there are so many lost people in the world, in French-speaking world. In Belgium alone, there were 13 million people, and there were only 2 or 3 churches of Christ of about 20 to 30 people at the time. And so it was hard to accept that God was going to condemn the world if there were not that many Christians in Belgium. But that night when I was fighting it, I came to understand that instead I should submit and I should do something about it. And I took the decision to become a preacher, at least to go through preaching school at that time and get the skills to be able to convince others. And then I married my wife, and we came back after a number of years to do mission work here.
Yes, and you have two daughters, correct?
2 daughters.
Yes, and
Candice and Helena.
yes, and you're very educated, man. You're not going to say that, but I know you. You did you teach history? Am I understanding that correct? Or English?
Yeah,
Or
well,
language, not French. Is that what it was?
yeah, it was French and history. I have a degree in French and history to be a teacher. And so I taught in the schools for a little bit before I went to the United States to study ministry.
And I think that's important to know that Christians don't have a blind faith. We seek the word, we seek the truth, and we ask challenging questions. And and you knock, and the door's going to be open. You seek, you're going to find, and you can be educated and still be a believer and a devout believer. And I like how you explained that moment where you said, I'm convinced, I'm ready to submit, and I see the dedication in your part of the solution to the problem of sin and people being lost. The Lord has the plan, but He's using you in so many different ways. What I love about your ministry is you focus with Strasbourg, but it's really much bigger than that. You do so much with French translation, putting your materials available for people in all the French-speaking world. You make yourself available in various ways. What are some ways that you try to connect with other French-speaking people to share with them resources, scriptural resources?
Well, one of the best ways, of course, is the internet. And so early on, we started a website. We had Adventures in Mission students who came to work with us. And one of the assignments for one of the girls was to create a website for us. And that was in the beginning of the year 2000, around 2004. So there were very few websites from churches that existed at the time, and still nowadays. But the fact we had an early start allowed us to position ourselves in well to be able to reach out in the world. We were the first ones to put the courses by correspondence online and have an interactive service. And so that has allowed us to develop contacts in many other countries. People search to know the Bible better. They type in Google course in the Bible, and our name will come up, and they can do that. And so through the years, yes, we have had many interactions due to this, also to the sermons. There was some neat website that exists in English. When a person wants to construct a sermon, you can go and find resource on those websites. It doesn't exist in France. They have very few books, Christian bookstores also. And in those Christian bookstores, you can find tools to help you prepare sermons. So I figured that one of the good things to do would be to go ahead and post every sermon in a written form as well as in an audio format on our website to attract preachers. And it has worked. Many preachers from other groups go and find our resource. And all of them end up writing me back and saying, well, I've never considered baptism. And now I'm thinking about it. And I'm teaching my congregation also that we need to be baptized. Along with that, of course, we have traveled many places. I was invited to go start churches in areas like New Caledonia. I was already in touch with the churches in Canada, French-speaking Canada, and because for a number of years we ministered in New Hampshire, and that also gave us some connections on there. We went to preach in Quebec City. And then I would say that in regard to connections with the people, there is also the aspect that I'm doing with Sunset now, producing more material, recording it, putting it online in video format. These would be courses, and it allows me to get to know even more people.
Yes, and that's what I love about your ministry. It's you see the church as what it's supposed to be, the universal church, and all languages, all people, all backgrounds, and you are doing what you can to connect and help in this and plant and water the best you can. But Strasbourg, not only is it a beautiful place, but we've already alluded a little bit to it, that it's still a challenging work. Where I'm at right now, I'm in my office in Fort Worth, Texas. There's probably 15 congregations in 15-mile radius. You've already made a comment about how the closest congregation for years was 5 hours away. And no doubt you don't have maybe that same exact network physically that I might have right now. So along with that, what are some of the challenges that you face in your ministry where you are right now?
Going along with what the previous question, what you're asking now, very early on, I realized it was important to have a global view of a church. There are many individuals, even in France, they were converted in some of the churches that exist, and then they moved away because of work, but they are all by themselves in cities. And so it is important to go visit them. It is important also to create many exchanges with others. When I mean by that, a pulpit exchange. It's important for me to be able to go preach in Belgium, and at a later point being able to receive a preacher from Belgium or from Paris, to create activities that are not just for the people of Strasbourg, but broader than that. And despite if I was trying to do a program for just the people in Strasbourg, for example, for the youth, camp is important. But if I was trying to have camp just for the youth of Strasbourg, with a church and even our contacts, it would not be sufficient amount of kids to rent a place. And so it's important to envision also associating other congregations that are further. So that was a challenge, being able to travel to all these places and provide support for everyone, spiritual support, as well as continue the ministry here. And one of the hard parts is to keep the right balance also. Because when you by yourself and start a congregation, if you go too often, nobody else will preach for you. The congregation is still very young, and people have not grown up in the church. They don't tend to say, I will replace you if you're not there this Sunday. And so if you go, it needs to be many times at all the moment in the Sunday. You need to be back on Sunday. And if you go on a Sunday, you really need to plan it well and try not to be gone too much until you've got the men that are ready to step in the position and making up for your absence.
Yes, of course. You made a comment when you were younger, you grew up in a country, a society that seemed to be more atheistic. And I know that seems to be a little bit like Western Europe as a whole. And sadly, I feel like that's kind of where the States are going right now. But you also have pockets of different types of religious culture. So in France, Strasbourg specifically, how would you describe the religious culture? Because I observed a few things just in my short time there, but I wanted to let you make some comments and about that.
I'm sorry, but I had a sound problem because somebody was ringing my bell many times. Would you mind just restating the question?
Yeah, so could you just describe the religious culture of Strasbourg? Not just the Churches of Christ, but Christendom, other religions, and atheism. What's the climate, the spiritual climate of where you are right now?
Okay. The statistics for this area of France, we've got about 15% Catholics, 13% Protestants. And when we talk about Protestant, I'm including the churches like Lutherans and Calvinists only. And then 1 out of 8 people is a Muslim in France. And so that means also about 15%. But they have a particularity compared to others that they are faithful in practicing Islam. Whereas Catholics here will say for 15%, I am a Catholic, but then when you ask, they say, I don't believe in God. And you wonder, how is it possible to be a Catholic and not believe in God? Well, it's just because it's a religion that is being passed by the parents. And they consider themselves from a Catholic background. They may still go to the offices for funeral when there's a marriage. But not long ago, I had a person who was burying his father. And I said, well, what's the point that you have a Catholic ceremony? Your father didn't believe in God. And your mom doesn't believe in God neither. And he answered to me, well, but the rest of the family may be upset if we don't do it. So we did it just for the rest of the family. And so that's what you need to take into account when you talk about 15% Catholics.
Yes, I was very surprised when you made that statistic about the Islam, but when I saw it in person, when we were distributing those invitations to the seminar, about 1 of every 8 people, like you said, was Islam, and likely many were immigrants as well. But I was very surprised to see that, and like you said, they're very dedicated to their faith, and so that's got to be a challenge. And I think about what's the process in sharing the gospel with somebody, seeing somebody go from unbeliever, unsure, to a faithful brother or sister in Christ? Because some countries it seems like it's easier. You just share the gospel. People believe the gospel. They obey the gospel. Sometimes big numbers of conversions, but God knows everyone's individual heart. But what's the process you've seen that of how it works best in Strasbourg of people going from unbeliever to believer in Christ? How can you walk me through maybe someone you've shared the gospel with and how that process worked?
Sure. Here, like you said, you never start at the point of just saying, let's open our Bible and study about baptism. It may happen, but it's very rare when it's there. The first thing to establish is first of all, does God exist? And even those will tell you yes. And if you ask them, how do you know? They will say, well, you either believe or you don't. And it's a concept of a blind faith. There is no concept of evidence that back up the faith. And so it's important to establish firmly the faith of people, studying with them that the world cannot just happen to be by chance. We wouldn't believe, you have heard the illustrations many times, you walk down the street, you find a watch, and it's perfectly working with all the wheels. You wouldn't believe it just exploded and came to being. It's the same with the world. That's where we start. Romans 1 talks about it. The power of God is seen through the works of his creation. Then the second thing to establish, once we can prove that the creation must have a creator, design must have a designer, is to determine which one is the God who determined all of this. And by the way, once you study evidence with people about the world, they usually have no answer back. They cannot answer you back when you say it didn't come by chance, because they never presented evidence for believing in a God. So they're very positive. They're willing to sit down and give you the time, and you have a chance to study these points. They will, most of the time, come out saying, okay, I realize there must be something else. Yes. Once that is done, the only the next part is to go ahead in the Bible and establish that God exists and he has revealed himself in the Bible alone. And there you have to start a process where you compare first the biblical text to other writings, the evidence that are provided in the text, the prophecies that are present, the scientific foreknowledge that you have, a number of things that the Bible is unique for, that the Quran does not have, that the Book of Mormon does not have, that the Rig Veda, guiding the Indians, does not have neither. And so it really takes some knowledge of other books as well to be able to point out key facts. For example, in the Rig Veda, it talks about the earth that would be set on top of elephants, and the elephants would be themselves standing on turtles. And it's the world, when there is an earthquake, is being attributed to these animals moving, and it's how the earth is shaken. When it becomes very easy to compare that to what the Bible says, the earth is suspended upon the emptiness. And the earth is like kug in the Hebrew, a sphere. Comparing these things to the other books becomes a good way to go about it. And usually people will also end up believe if they take the time to go through these studies, and then from there, once you establish authority from the Bible, sometimes it may be needed to also talk about there's no other authority, such as modern day prophets, such as the Pope, or others that may try to say that nowadays they have revelation and can guide you through your faith, but then you're ready to enter the teachings about the church. And I would say first Jesus. They have to know who is Jesus.
We know his church.
You don't convert someone to doctrine. You convert someone to Jesus and God. So you've got to present Jesus a little bit before you dive into doctrine. It's a long process to get there. You imagine if you have to start from this far back.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, and that's where I thought you would go with this, because that process is needed. It's essential, it's beneficial, but it does take time. It's a process, and that's why you see, I think that model of teaching is really the model that I have to focus more on too, even where I'm at. And you don't have these massive, huge, fast-paced conversions happening, because it's a process to turn people to the Lord. because from their environment and their upbringing, it's going to take time. So I think when we look at, if you want to call it numbers and church growth in Western Europe, we have to consider the relationships that have to be built. We have to consider the time to dig into Christian evidences and apologetics and to guide people in the word. And laborers are needed. I mean, you're one of not a whole lot of people who are either native laborers or international missionaries. They're John 4:35 is so true, isn't it? About there's a lot of work to be done where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I was thinking about another point.
Yes.
Even when you studied about the doctrine, afterwards, you still have to help people come out of the pack of knots they are into. To be able, you have to untangle the knots for them to have a life with Jesus. What do I mean by that? I mean that when you have lived in the world for 20, 30, 40, 50 years and never heard about Jesus Christ, you're going to have a number of life experience and mistakes that you have done along the way that have made your life a pack of knots. Whatever it is, previous marriages, previous children, drugs that you have gotten into. So even once you present them with a doctrine, they've got to be able to say, okay, but from here on, I will turn away from alcoholism, or I will turn away from these things that were providing a solution for me to find happiness despite the fact that I was not happy in life. And that takes time as well. They can understand the plan of salvation, but they still have to be able to understand that the way that leads to Christ is different than the ways of the world, and understand that Jesus is going to help them. But there is a lot to undo.
Yeah.
And it's not
your whole born again process is an ongoing process too. You continue to untie those knots, and it's the discipleship process. Go and make disciples in all nations. So you definitely have your work cut out. And I was so glad that you let me speak on some family type issues when I was there, because that's part of the discipleship process and so many aspects of the Christian life. Let me transition to the last few moments here. You know, everything we go through, whatever challenges we go through, work has its days that are tough, but there are days and highlights and moments that are just amazing. And it makes everything that we do worth what we're doing and what you're doing. Could you share with me, just in your time in Strasbourg, maybe just one or two examples of just some highlights that make it worth what you're doing, some good moments in your ministry?
Well, yes, there's many ways to go, many ways to answer this question. What's most present in my life is probably not what you are searching for. But I would say that the one thing that I've enjoyed about being a missionary is, first of all, the fact that your work is made in family. And one of the highlights I still want to say is the ability to lead ministry with your family along the way, and your family being first beneficiary of everything that you're doing. In the United States, when I was working as a minister, your family is often left in other classes with other people, or your family is left behind while you're having the meetings and doing things with others. One of the joy that I have had, and it's one of the blessings of being a missionary, is that my family was with me every single step of the way, and I had the pleasure to first teach them. So other stories that were very good, every time that we've had a conversion, of course, and we saw somebody responding and moving away from what they were believing, has been very good. A few years ago, one of the examples would be this young man that had been following the sermons for a number of weeks on the internet. He arrived in Strasbourg. He was a student here, and he decided he wanted to find a church. Obviously, he had already some belief system in place, but he was not Church of Christ. He was from a denominational church. And after studying for a number of weeks, he contacted me. We studied together for a while on the side. And not only did he choose to become a member of the Lord's Church, but he also brought us back about 5 or 6 of students who were studying with him in the university, were studying in geology, they were high-level students. And so it was a joy to see all of them being baptized in the Lord. It was a time that was unique. We also had another engineer that ended up converting at the time. And I remember some of our Bible class, I was presenting the need to believe in God with some of the facts that I told you. I was talking about statistics, and I was writing on the board the probability for the earth to just happen by chance. Oh, I think it was maybe the living cell to constitute itself as it is, with all its inner system. And as I was writing down the number of zero, I mean, the board was full of zeros, one of the engineers raised his hand and he said, "Wait, I think you've made a mistake." I'm like, "Oh, what is he going to say?" Because he's way higher than I am in science. And I'm like, "What have I said wrong?" So I paused and he said, "You forgot 1 0 in the calculation that you have made." That was the level of students that I was dealing with. And to see this type of people ending up, they've grown up in pagan homes with no family models for their life. So when I was talking about the pack of nuts, it's true everywhere, but you don't have any model to help you know what could be different. Your family, your grandparents, your parents, the people around you, they're all living in the world and they have different guidelines for their life. To see all these guys coming and then giving their life to God and ended up being converted and seeing the joy of having a group afterwards where we worship compared to when we first arrived. And we had the worship, my wife and I, just by ourselves in our living room. I still see my little daughter, youngest. She was a baby. She was crawling under the Lord's table. I would say the Lord's table where the Lord's Supper was, and we had set the elements, and she was under, and we were just us two. But then seeing the church full of people like that, that was just a treat.
That's wonderful. Appreciate you sharing that. You mentioned you're the missionary, and that's what you're doing. You're on the mission to seek and to save the lost. The Lord is using you, and in order to do this, I know that it requires support for you to do this on a full-time level. And I'm just curious, you have some brethren that help support your ministry, and if anybody's interested in knowing more about what you do, they could obviously contact you. Perhaps I'll put your maybe I'll tag Tammy on this video so people could reach out to her. But are there any churches that they could reach out to get connected to seeing what kind of support they could help offer your ministry?
Yeah, can contact the Glen Allen Church of Christ in Virginia, and find out. And I would say that one of the things that I would like to do more is to be able to go in places. You know, we've talked a lot about how here it is difficult and you have to go from so far to be able to bring the people to Christ. There are other French nations where it's a little different, but there are no missionaries there. And for example, in New Caledonia, when we go out there, I've gone there 2 or 3 times, you go distribute on the public square and you say, "Do you want to learn about God?" Not a single person said no to me. Not a single person when I was distributing. And there are no missionaries out there, and they're begging, "Please come back and help us." We would start Bible studies. It would last 4 hours. The room would get fuller and fuller. And when it was time to go, and they would say, "Please stay longer." But you couldn't stay to continue the work because of the lack of time, due to the lack of finances. And so I'm receiving a lot of plea from many people saying, "I want to be baptized in some corners of the world, but I don't have anybody to baptize me. If I'm baptized, then I would like for having a church afterwards. I need some tools in my hand. I've got other places begging for a visit because they need encouragement, countries where they are receptive. The funds are lacking to travel to these places because it's expensive to travel across the world."
Some additional travel funds for you to do some of these mission efforts, even within the French-speaking mission you're already involved in. And where is New Caledonia at again? I got my globe here.
It's close to Australia and New Zealand. And you know, I've talked about finances. Let me be very clear about this. I would by far prefer for someone to say also, I want myself to be doing this kind of trips. If you speak French, because that's an essential part, people do not always speak English, especially in poorer areas of our world. If you do speak French and you do have a desire to go and help in these places, write me, and I'll gladly put you in touch and suggest a number of places in Africa, across the world, where you can go and give a hand. And if you can, perhaps you have the funds to help us do so, whichever.
Yes, amen. Thank you for sharing that. Well, we're going to be wrapping up this. I know 30 minutes goes by so fast, and there's so much more we could say and talk about. But I just want to, I like asking this question to anybody because I like to hear about food. And I wanted to ask you, when you are there in Strasbourg and you say, once the lockdown is lifted, because you're stuck inside till May 11th at the minimum, I understand, if you could get the best French dish, or maybe something else, Belgian, I don't know. What's your favorite dish to eat where you are? Your favorite meal?
I'm looking forward to go back and have an ice cream. What they call the spaghetti ice cream. So they put vanilla ice cream inside the machine and it comes out in the shape of spaghetti. And they put strawberry sauce on it and grated white chocolate. Okay. That's what I'm looking forward to. But we have many other specialties in this area. Tarte flambée, pizza with cream.
Yeah, I didn't have any spaghetti ice cream, but at least it doesn't have marinara sauce on the ice cream. So that makes a lot more sense. Well, that's yeah. Well, brother, we appreciate you. I appreciate you and Tammy, and we enjoyed visiting with you and working with you for a short time. We continue to prayerfully and support what you're doing, but yeah, I would love to connect other French speaking missionaries to you, and keep doing what you're doing, and together we'll keep marching to Zion, and one day we'll get there. I know it. The Lord's going to come back. He's preparing a place, and we get to go be with him. So that's what's all. We're going to keep pressing to that moment, that prize. So, all right, brother. Great talking with you today.
Great talking with you also.
All right. God bless.